Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. As a reminder, this webinar will be recorded and we'll be posting it to our YouTube and sharing the slides upon request. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. My name is Joanne. I'm with the California Product Stewardship Council, and we're excited today to share some of the final results from our pilot project in San Francisco on clothing repair. So Yalin is going to be hosting our slides. So if you want to go to the next slide, Yalin. Just as a little reminder and some housekeeping, we're going to hold space at the end of the webinar for question and answer, but please don't hesitate to use the chat. We have quite a few staff members monitoring the chat. We can respond in writing, but we can also respond while we're speaking. So whether it's clarifying or even a discussion question, please don't hesitate to use the multiple channels that we have available for us. So using the chat, or once you get to the end of the webinar, we can raise hands and get deeper into discussion. So once again, thank you everyone joining us today. We have Julie Bryant, the Director of Sustainability from Goodwill San Francisco Bay, and Connie Ulasewicz, who's the founder of CBU Productions and Professor Emeritus from San Francisco State University. Thank you both for being with us today. Next slide. For those who don't know who the California Product Stewardship Council is, we're a nonprofit. We're based out of Sacramento, California, and we're primarily funded by local government jurisdictions. Yala, do you mind muting people who are unmuted, please? Thank you. So CPSC is, as you can see, our board is local government. We have rural, we have urban, we have northern, we have southern, we have central California. Next slide. You might see some people you know, you might see your boss, you might see your contracted hauler. Next slide. But ultimately, when you look at kind of our staff and who we represent, we're a really small team with really big names behind us. So again, we just want to give a big thank you to our funders and the local governments who support CPSC. Next slide. As you can see throughout California, if you're in a jurisdiction that's not green, maybe consider reaching out to us and we can get you involved in CPSC and all the wonderful things we do. Next slide. Some of our private business sponsors, again, we wouldn't be here without the support. So again, a big thank you to everyone. Next slide. I'm going to hand it over to Connie for her self-introduction. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Hello, everyone. Good to meet you all. I am Connie Ulasewicz. I have collaborated on this project and on several others with San Francisco State when I was a professor there, and also with the Office of the Environment and Goodwill, actually. And my engagement now is as an author and educator and a community builder around extending the life of our clothing and textile choices and understanding them better. Next slide, please.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see so many people on this webinar. I will be giving a little bit of an overview of Goodwill. You all know Goodwill, but I think there's a few surprises in store for all of you here. Goodwill of the San Francisco Bay is actually part of an international network of more than 150 community-based autonomous organizations operating under the Goodwill International umbrella. I think that's a fun fact about us that a lot of people don't know. And I work for the Goodwill of the SF Bay, and our affiliate covers 6 of the Bay Area counties with 34 retail stores and 33 donation sites. And while many of you know Goodwill as a convenient place to donate unwanted household goods, and others really know it as a place to purchase gently used items at a good price, you may not know that we use all of our proceeds to provide training and work opportunities and support to thousands of job seekers each year. In fact, our mission is to create life-changing opportunities through training and the power of work. And we provide all the necessary support to help people, especially those with multiple impediments to employment, to gain expertise and tools they need to fully participate in today's job market. We don't rely heavily on government grants like other nonprofits. Instead, we work hard to maximize the value of every donation, and we use our retail sales revenues to advance our mission. We consider ourselves one of the original social enterprises. In 2002 alone, we supported over 2,800 people with career services, and we placed more than 1,100 people into jobs. And again, that's just our Bay Area affiliate. And on to the next slide, please. Another fun fact about Goodwill is that the original affiliate has been around for more than 120 years. In 1902, the Reverend Edgar J. Helms started the first Goodwill in Boston, Massachusetts, as part of his ministry. And Helms and his congregation collect used household goods and clothing being discarded from wealthier neighborhoods of the city, and actually trained and hired the unemployed or impoverished to mend and repair them. So I just love that mending is part of our history and that we're really coming for full circle here. Next slide, please. And now you know about our main mission, but a happy side effect is that we've grown to become a key part of the reuse infrastructure in the Bay Area. And we've really taken great pride in that role that we now play to keep materials out of the landfill. Our reuse network we've created preserves the embodied energy and natural resources that were used to make all your donated goods and materials in the first place. And we help people avoid the purchase of new goods with our secondhand sales. While selling materials is our lifeblood and really a key part of our organizational model, we are also regularly asking ourselves, how can we do even more to support the well-being of our community and planet? And a few examples of our commitment to advancing our sustainability impacts include we've actually replaced many of Goodwill's diesel trucks with electric, which has resulted in more than 135 tons of greenhouse gases each year. We've actually had these electric vehicles for 5 years. Our lease just ended in December, and just last week we placed a new order for new vehicles. So it's really exciting to get those newer models coming soon to our locations to support our transportation of our donated goods. We also have a sustainability steering committee to assess Goodwill's water, fuel, waste, and energy impacts. I actually lead that steering committee, and it's made up of leaders from across our lines of business. We have also established Goodwill's Recompute program, where employees learn how to disassemble computers and electronics, and we refurbish them for sale either online or in our retail stores. And most importantly, we're really committed to aftermarket innovation. We regularly assess how we can be more efficient with our donation management and maximize the value of every item, especially with textiles, as the repair and recycling space rapidly changes. So we've partnered on this project, which was really exciting, and we continue to partner with SF State to repurpose unsellable garments through repair and redesign. Even after the grant ended, we're continuing that partnership. We also participate in helping shape innovative clothing repair and recycling policies through lobbying state lawmakers, and really by participating in the California State Textile Recovery Advisory Committee. And last but not least, we've also collaborated with local and international nonprofits to characterize our textile donations and provide data and recommendations to enable a more efficient and effective textile sorting system. So with that little overview of Goodwill, I'll hand it back to Joanne.
Thanks. So the reason that we're here today, and the whole reason of the project, is that textiles in the waste stream are a problem. They're a problem here in California, but more importantly, they're a problem in landfills around the world. So when we kind of go into these pilot projects and ultimately considering what permanent programs we want, we have to first address and kind of label the problem. And first and foremost, with textiles and clothing, overproduction and the excessive volumes that are entering our market are problematic from a management standpoint, from a very basic level. But when we start digging deeper into the materials, into the waste stream, you find that it's really complicated, especially when you compare it to other end-of-life like material recovery programs like mattresses or carpet. When you look at textiles and clothing, it crosses multiple industries. So we're not just talking all the time about apparel. There's other products that use textiles. We're talking about complex blends. We worked with SF Goodwill in 2020 to do a preliminary characterization before this project started. So what we did in 2 days was studying the fiber blends of the textiles and clothing that we're not selling on the floor, but we were just using the labels. We didn't have any fancy fiber identification devices. So going off the labels alone, we found in 2 days, 44 unique fibers, 275 unique blends, and a lot of unknowns. So a really big springboard off into how we designed these projects to address some of these problems. You know, the outdated labeling, some of the transparency issues. I'm going to hand it over to Connie, who's going to really give you a little more context as to why textiles in the waste stream are a problem and how it can be prevented. Connie might be frozen. Oh, there's Connie. Hi, Connie.
Unmuted, excuse me. Next slide, please. So,
Connie, I think you were muted and frozen when you were speaking on the last slide.
Okay.
So yeah, we didn't hear
I'm
you.
sorry,
Thank
I apologize to everybody. If you can go back to the other slide then, please. So the transparency and the usability, what happens is that it's the concept of what comes first, the manufacturer, over manufacturing, or the person who's buying or renting, over renting and not looking at overbuying and not knowing what's in their closet. And right now we're at a point where we have to try to tackle whichever of those or all of those is possible. And what we found through this study was that when we were able to identify that something had a damage on it or something had a stain on it, we were able to then, Goodwill said, okay, we could sell it if we're telling people what that is, because previous to this, they weren't selling anything in their retail stores, but these were high value items. So and people were like, okay, you're telling me what's going on. I can take that and I can fix that. Because often what happens is that we give things to Goodwill, feel really great about the fact that we're moving things forward, knowing that it was damaged, it was really stained, it needed help. And we feel good about what we do. And then we say, well, why did Goodwill only sell 20 to 30% of what we gave them? It's who came first? Who's making the decisions here? So we have to tackle all of these because it's a huge problem, excuse me, that my understanding from all the work that we've done is that people want more information about what to do. Okay, I have 275 unique blends. Do we have to have all those fibers within that? Who's making that decision, and what should I, as the customer or the employee, do about that? Thank you. Next slide.
So one of the things that CPSC did to prepare for this project, we actually have several projects that we'll explain in a little bit, and also to prepare for some of our policy work, was we created an advisory committee. And our goal with the advisory committee was to get representation from all the different stages of the life cycle of a garment. So everything from manufacturing to branding to retail. We also have waste haulers, local government, and recyclers. And by having the full life cycle represented on this advisory committee, we can have meaningful discussions and ultimately advising CPSC on how to move forward and make decisions in these pilot projects or make decisions in policy, because ultimately nothing happens in a silo. So with this pilot project and any permanent program, we want everyone to make informed decisions. So our advisory committee has several publications you can find on our website. We also do lobbying and kind of advising on the policy standpoint that we'll talk about in a little bit. Next slide. Here's a list of all the textile related pilot projects that CPSC is working on. The ones at the top are the ones that are active. So today we're going to talk about the San Francisco Department of Environment, the repair project. But as you can see, we're working on shoe recycling with Napa County. We're working with the city of Los Angeles to set up some sorting hubs, and ultimately, if you look at kind of what projects we closed, they really built a lot of momentum to where we're going. So mapping out some of the textile handlers, as you can see in the Alameda project, that's maybe where the map started, but we'll talk in a few slides of where the map is today. And every time we get new projects, we're adding new textile repair businesses and cleaning businesses and recyclers to this map and to this network, so that the ultimate end goal is to really have a program for textile management that utilizes the established infrastructure. Next slide. So a big thank you to the San Francisco Environment Department. This is under the City and County of San Francisco. Every year they do these zero waste grants. So you could be like us and apply next year. I do believe this year it has closed. So 2024 might be your next opportunity. This is a wonderful example of local government trying to invest money into finding solutions. San Francisco is not the only county that does these local grants. On that previous slide, you saw Alameda County, some of the other counties, San Mateo County. These are really great examples of how a local government who knows they have to manage waste are looking to their community for solutions. So again, a big thank you to all the cities and counties that offer this funding. And through the competitive process, CPSC applied with Connie and with Goodwill, and we applied together. And I'll be honest, our original scope was a little different. Our original scope was to actually develop a sewing school, to develop a curriculum for Goodwill, to train workers. But what we really got to thinking as we started to develop our budget, develop kind of our project outcomes, was we had to see what was possible. We had to see, test the waters as to what kind of repairs, what kind of garments. So we're going to really talk today about what we learned and how other businesses can take our findings to develop their own repair programs. And just a quick, I see Connie and Julie frozen on my side. Oh, no, they just started moving. Thanks. Okay, next slide.
So I am going to briefly tell you about two grants that was very happy that the San Francisco Office of the Environment also funded. That was the first one was with a local business and myself and San Francisco State. So it was the idea of community organization, school, business working together. We all live in communities, I believe, where the banners that you see here that says bold work. So there's San Francisco State advertising on banners throughout the city, the wonders of going to school here. But every campaign has a beginning and an end. And I had looked up and said, what happens at the end of this campaign? And it was a local business that was making these. Also, their parent company is out of Los Angeles, but they were making them. They took them down, put the new ones up. And what I found wasn't what I thought was happening with them. So we didn't want them to go to landfill. This was a PVC material that was being used. So we got the grant to determine if there were other products. So we started also with students within the garment classes trying to maneuver these. That didn't work. Different types of bags. So we came up with this tote bag that we also wanted to have no waste. So we were using the entire banner. The only thing that we were adding on was the handles on the top. Everyone was unique. We were all ready to go, put them in the store for graduation. Then COVID hit. So graduation didn't happen, graduation hadn't happened, and we just thought that would be the reminder of what these would be for. So the next concept was, okay, that won't work. We'll give them when we come back to school at the opening reception to faculty. That didn't happen either. So now they have been donated and been given out to different people at San Francisco State. We have not gone forward with the project for various reasons. But the other grant that we got was what also, as Joanne was saying, when you write for the grants, you may think you know exactly what you want, but as you go through the grant process, don't be alarmed as it changed, because the funders will also be happy about the change that you had because you may find something else out. This was called the Wear Movement, and it was many clothing closets or community closets are happening around the area. That's what we pitched for here with getting clothing in and giving it out to people. It is still happening outside of the grant. Wonderful project. 2 examples that were funded. Thank you. Next slide.
One of the first things we had to do with this pilot project, as well as the one in Alameda County, is find out who's going to be sewing these for us. And so what we did was a big call for sewing professionals and textile professionals. What we did, even if they didn't qualify for the contract as a vendor, we added them to the map because there might be other people or other projects that might not have the same requirements as we did with our grant. So for example, with our grant, we needed someone with insurance and someone with a garment worker's license. Because Goodwill was going to be selling these items, we needed a licensed contractor sewing professional, and that's a California state law. So one of the things that we really did was adding everyone we've met in this space to the map in hopes that they'll get other business and other opportunities. But for our pilot project, we selected 2 vendors in particular that met all the requirements in our contract, but also had some really great features that made them a really special opportunity. Next slide. So as an example of everyone who was involved in this project, we had the 3 partners. The main partners were Goodwill, CPSC, and CBU. Our funder was SF Environment. But as you look through the vendors at the bottom, we were really lucky to be working with businesses like Designing a Difference Sew House, who I believe Rebecca Kahu is on the webinar right now. So thank you, Rebecca. We'll share some pictures in just a little bit. Savvy Green Cleaners. San Francisco has a green business certification program. So by utilizing their certification program, it made our vendor selection easier because there were only 2 garment cleaning businesses that were certified green, meaning they didn't have toxic detergents, they didn't have any VOC processes. So we selected Savvy Green Cleaner in central San Francisco. And then thirdly, we used some of the sewing skill and great talent at San Francisco State. Because those students did not have the garment worker's license, we did a voluntary kind of partnership where we didn't pay them for their labor, but they got a lot of opportunities to showcase the garments and get that experience with Goodwill, where they can actually say they're a featured designer and their garments will be showcased around the city in the different stores. San Francisco State also got to host their own fashion show, which we'll share in a little bit. So ultimately, it was through these partnerships that made this project so successful because no one entity could have completed this on their own. Next slide. Connie?
These are the 3 faculty members at San Francisco State that helped with the redesign and product life extension. And that also meant inventory and working with students and explaining the process and everything like that. And I realized that there's another faculty member who's not on here that also helped with the grants, and that would have been Gail Baugh. She helped with to get the grants and pursue her vast amount of textile knowledge with the Wear Movement grant that I spoke about previously. Next slide. So this is Rebecca Kohua, who was a faculty, a undergrad and a master's student at San Francisco State. She has a factory called Designing a Difference. Her whole mission also, as you can see on the slide, is creating opportunities and employment for people. And she reached out and was part of this grant. And if I can say, the one challenge with this grant that people don't understand a lot with reuse is that every item is special. So every item needs to be looked at. And if the first item you're getting in is denim and the second item is that you're getting is a cotton t-shirt or a cotton shirt, you may need a different thread, a different tension, a different needle, a different machine. And it takes time to figure out these tasks, and time equals money. Need I say more? Next slide, please. This is the owner of in the San Francisco Savvy Green Cleaners. She was wonderful. She was helpful. And it was great that we were able to work with her and also share the goodness of her with all of you and other people that might not think of what businesses to look for to do this kind of work. Next slide, please. So basically, we had a 5-step process that we did, and we worked with Goodwill, and that 5-step is what I'll explain to you now. We worked with Goodwill, as Joanne said in the beginning, and what they did here was the clothing items that we were working with were the ones that they had a higher retail projected value when they were sold online. So Goodwill does sell online, and these were the items that when they go down the conveyor belt and say, okay, this has a higher value, they know that because of the labels that they're in that, and they've tracked that very well. Then the next conveyor belt that they go down and say, well, this would be great, but it's damaged, it's torn, so then it's put aside. Those were the items that Joanne and I came in and looked at and said, well, that could be repaired. Well, that stain could be removed. Well, we could redesign this. But what we found in this study was 2 things. One was it really takes an eye for understanding how a garment is put together to understand if taking apart has a value that's worth it for the process of in inventory, out of inventory, paying for someone to get it, to redesign it, putting it back in and selling it. Next slide, please. So what we did then was we segregated the garments by if they needed to be cleaned or if they needed to be repaired or redesigned. We did that initially, and then this is a process that continued with working with Goodwill. They then took this on, and they were the people that were classifying into these 2 groups, and then also working with the 2 merchants outside the Designing a Difference and Savvy Green Cleaners, and getting them there and getting them back. Next slide, please. So this was the repairs, some of them that were done, the repair and the redesign. There was a schedule that was developed of how long it would take to do this, how long it would take to clean them, how long it would take to get them back. And this is what we're showing you here. And that was one of the major components of this. At one time, as Joanne had said, we were thinking, well, what if we had sewers within Goodwill? Then we wouldn't have to be going out and about, and they could tell the story there. That may happen. We don't know. Next slide, please. So This is an example of a before project all the way on the left, the after what it was made into, and it going down the runway at San Francisco State. So what happened was, as we were moving along and realizing what was cost effective, and also that there are students that appreciate Goodwill, are hungry to do redesign, hungry to get real experience on real garments. So that is what you're seeing here. There were about 40 garments that were given to Goodwill this spring semester. They were remade into about 25 pieces that went down the runway. And what the students found and what I found in doing the pickup and delivery is, again, if I see this vest and I don't know what it looked like before, I don't really appreciate what happened to it, and I don't understand it. So what Goodwill has decided to do is do windows in the community showing before and after, so that the people that may want to purchase these items or understand how you can get something from Goodwill and you can redesign it. Keep it in the system. Wonderful, wonderful garments that went down the runway. Next slide, please. So then garments were the garments that were collected from all the 3 different sources that we had previously mentioned were going back to Goodwill. And there was this tag that you can see here that says mended with care, because what the feeling is although there's been no FTC, the Federal Trade Commission in the United States that regulates the labeling laws, if you change a garment and you take that jacket that had a label that said, if it said CBU Productions, and I make it into that vest and it still has the CBU Productions tag on it, who's responsible for that? And so what we're doing is realizing if it said mended with care, then that showed that the garment had some changes that were made to it. And that is what you're seeing here. All these garments were then, the idea was to be selling them online through the Goodwill stores. And Goodwill has an excellent setup in their facility, and this facility is in South City, San Francisco, of managing and maintaining that. Next slide, please.
So then we got to number crunching, which is what CPSC loves to do. And so what you see here are some of the numbers as of May, early May. So as you can see, it's not cheap to just do a quick sew and to do, a quick redesign, because as Connie mentioned, it's not quick. Each garment's different, and needing vendors that have standardized design patterns is nice, but if they don't know what they're receiving, those design templates don't always work. So we learned a lot in terms of really, so these are costs per item. And so on average, we were paying, about $34 for sewing. But again, it's not just one hem. There are usually multiple damages on these items, and really worthwhile. The reason we picked items that were $45 of value or higher is because we needed to make sure we were spending less than it would actually sell for. So really, when we look at kind of what was invested into repairing these items, we also have to think about what are the costs that were externalized, meaning they were not direct costs for the sewing and repairing, so they're not always reflected in our traditional calculations. One, the labor for sorting, tracking, and reporting. Goodwill's staff actually had to change their flow. They actually had to create space for the rack and the boxes for the damaged goods. And if anyone knows anything about California businesses, space and storage is expensive and hard to come by. So again, that's a cost that's not reflected in our calculations because it's an indirect externalized cost. Similarly, the transportation to and from, although it was funded by the grant, it was not part of the calculation. it would have increased these numbers a little bit higher. And so we ultimately decided to keep those out of the calculation so we could see just the true cost of handling the materials. Next slide. So looking at the successes and the challenges and what we really learned from this project is the absolute opportunity for landfill diversion. These items maybe not would have gone to the landfill in San Francisco, but there's no way to know if it would have been deemed unusable later on in the life cycle. And also, again, when we look at which items are worth repairing, we're going to be diverting items and repairing items that are of higher value. So although this doesn't address fast fashion, when we talk about the items that were not worth repairing, we're talking about items that probably still went to the landfill in some point of their life cycle. So we got to support businesses, women-owned businesses, BIPOC-owned businesses, local, independent businesses. Cutting checks for these businesses are hands down one of my favorite parts of my job. So supporting these businesses and ultimately the handlers map. We want more people to engage in repair. So giving them easy access to who are the businesses that do these services is a great success of this program. Inspiring students, designers, brands. Although not mentioned, there were several brands that were involved, whether it was just watching the outcomes, participating in the fashion shows, or even just here on the webinar to learn what we learned. We know that the brands and designers who are making garments for brands, whether it's transnational or even independent designers, have a huge opportunity to start selling repaired items, redesigned items. These materials are already manufactured. These materials are already in our market. So the access and opportunity for brands and designers are immense. And that's really what was uncovered in this opportunity. And greater awareness of the value of our clothing. We really, as a team, but also as part of the customers of Goodwill, identifying, which fibers are higher quality, which brands, are recognizable, and understanding that, if you just put a simple repair, you automatically expand the lifespan of these garments. So the value and I really like what Julie said earlier, the embedded energy in these products that were used to make them are then continued and valued. Next, we have our challenges. So, it wouldn't be successful if we didn't actually have some challenges to address. And Beth, I see your question and we'll definitely answer that in just a moment. So obviously our cost per garment. And I'm not going to sit there and say, we can do it cheaper because the quality of our vendors and the experience and time they put in was well valued. I do believe, though, that if a brand or another thrift store wanted to do this at scale, they might want to look into partnerships where they could, instead of doing, 5, 10 garments at a time, maybe looking at hundreds or thousands at a time to get your cost of your economic scale to lower the costs. But ultimately, as part of the pilot, we're not trying to get it as cheap as possible. We're trying to explore what's possible. So although it's a challenge in terms of expansion of ongoing repairs, I would say it's not a challenge for the service of repairs. And what we paid for this project would probably be a very similar cost of what we would be paying as individuals. So knowing that, we could just save money if we expanded and increased, we're really happy with what we got for our cost benefits now. Fiber identification, this is a challenge not just for repair, for recycling as well. It matters how much stretch there is. It matters how much synthetic versus naturals are in there. It matters, and I'm not a sewing professional, but I learned a lot from Connie in working with our vendors where, things like tacked and there's different stitches for different types of stretch. And so you need the professionals involved in these types of projects, and they need to know what fibers they're working with. So whether it's this project or some other opportunity in the future, fiber identification needs to be updated. It actually hasn't been updated since the 70s, so a great opportunity there. And ultimately, these redesign outcomes and telling the story. Connie mentioned this earlier, but when you see a redesigned garment just as it is, and you don't know that someone diverted this damaged good, someone, took the creative freedom to think of a new design for the previous materials, it doesn't have the same story or the same connection that you would have if you're just buying an item brand new off the retail floor. So with the project partners, we really got involved in how can we tell the story. So we created those mended with care labels. We created a special QR code where you could read about the project. So if you scan that right now, you could read everything we wrote, and you could see we had all the garments that were listed on eBay in one accessible list. So if someone wanted to shop, the items that were part of this project, they could simply click that link and find all the repaired items. And I will tell you, there were some Christian Dior's, there were some Gucci's, there were some really recognizable high value luxury brands. So ultimately we were happy with, the story we got to tell and the items that were repaired and given more life. Next slide, but I know I have a couple questions. So I'm just going to go over this and then we'll kind of jump back to those questions. So I don't want anyone to think that we're skipping them. So I'm going to hand it over to Julie to take this slide.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to cover what we identified as next steps. And these are really big picture next steps, but I think a lot of them I think really need to happen or should happen to an extent to really get repair programs happening in a more widespread way. So one of the things we identified as a next step is we really need to incentivize more designers and retailers to include repaired and redesigned garments in their collections. As Joanne was saying, telling the story is very tricky. I think consumers are still hesitant to purchase something if it might have been repaired or more importantly, redesigned completely from how it was designed originally. I think there's some concern really about purchasing garments like this. So making this available in a more widespread way, like having more brands sell redesigned garments, I think will sort of normalize that concept and instill confidence in consumers that that's something they would want to purchase. Let's see, number two, I think one of the other next steps is really, and this is a big one, is we really need to engage brands to fund the cost barriers and challenges to develop a circular economy. They're the ones that make these products in the first place. And Goodwill receives pretty much anything and everything you can think of. If you name it, we've received it at some point, but it is so tricky when we have such a wide variety of materials and that material quality seems to be going down over time. How do we kind of start at the beginning, work up and get the brands to start thinking about things from the beginning and designing goods really thinking about things from the beginning and really funding some of these cost barriers. Ultimately, they're kind of responsible for some of the challenges that we have in place and some of the barriers to more widespread repair projects. How do we improve material recovery systems for unusable garments? I think improving some of those recycling and redesign opportunities, like and having more markets available to organizations like Goodwill, I think that will really help support circularity, additional circularity of some of the goods that we receive. And then supporting, there's a lot of local businesses that run on shoestring budgets, but yet they provide such critical infrastructure to the local circular economy. So I think having additional support to local businesses is really critical as well. And I just want to mention one more thing that's not on this list. I was reading the chat. Gail, thank you for your comment. I'm just going to read it out loud. This study was a series of one-offs and costs are high. It would be great to develop a means to identify fast repairs in the highest value. I think having that, going through that process of identifying those things, I think would really help overcome some of the barriers Joanne mentioned. So I love that comment. Thank you.
Actually, can we go back to that previous slide? Because yeah, I just also want to say, I think it's also one of the learning points that our vendors had, and I don't want to speak for Rebecca. We're happy to allow her to speak for herself, but I know she went into this project kind of liking the idea of upcycling and redesign. And I think coming out of it, she had some standard templates and design patterns that hopefully she'll use in the future. But I absolutely agree and I appreciate that comment, Gail, because this is an exploratory pilot, and ultimately when we see what the future of this could be, it is truly scalable and finding those high value repairs. Because ultimately, like we said earlier, we only repaired items that were deemed $45 valuable or higher. So that gives a whole section of items that were valued less that were just not worth repairing. And so that becomes a burden on the thrifts. It becomes a burden on the landfills because the cost barriers of actually repairing those items or getting them to recyclers is not the burden that thrift should have to pay. So ultimately, when we talk about the ways that we want to move forward, is we want to get the brands who've profited off the items, putting them into the market, who've washed their hands clean and think they don't have responsibility for that end of life, is to get them engaged, because ultimately we can repair and we can reuse, but until that moment where that product is no longer usable, nobody has solutions for textiles and clothing for the materials that are on our market. There's recyclers that are taking materials, but we don't have a scaled material recovery system for textiles focused on the unusables that sorts, transports, and manages them in a responsible way. So I will give a quick plug to SB 707 by Senator Josh Newman. There is a legislation in our legislature right now in California. This is a bill that is sponsored by CPSC that is providing some solutions to some of these cost barriers. So if anyone has any questions or wants information on that bill, we can put a link in the chat. But ultimately, until we can have voluntary solutions, legislation is the way to go to really get everyone at the table and to provide equitable funding for a long-term solution. So I am going to go back and I see a couple of questions, and comments that I do want to explain. So Elise asked about that $31 sale price. So can we go back to that slide with the sale prices? So these are what it's sold on eBay. So this is an average sale price. So some of them were listed at $19 and sold at $19.99. Some items were sold or listed at $19.99 and then sold for $200. So it really varied. If someone wants more details on which brands had different pricing, we did some pretty interesting analyses for the final report, like which brands sold the fastest, which brands sold for the highest market sale value. We also looked at fiber type. Maybe certain fiber types sold faster or higher value. So again, we have our final report coming out in just a few months after San Francisco reviews it. And we're really excited to share our learnings with others so that they can also get involved. And someone's asking about the opportunity to train employees to repair and redesign. And I think that's ultimately something that all thrift stores could consider. Every single community that I know of has some sort of garment repair business, garment cleaning business. So there's opportunities for retailers or thrift stores to forge those partnerships without doing new hires. But I know Julie might be able to speak specifically if there's any intention to do a hiring internally for sewing. But I'll say that there might be, from what I've learned from the Goodwill team, is they still want to explore some opportunities before making that commitment for hiring. So, Julie, did you have anything to add specifically on that item?
I mean, no, other than, as you're learning today, these are expensive endeavors. They require space, labor, extensive training. All that said, we are very excited about the possibility of potentially in the future hiring somebody to do garment repair. We think it really very much aligns with our mission of job training and job opportunities. So it's something that we'll continue to look at. I think it requires funding, to be really honest. We're a nonprofit, so we're fairly lean, but we are committed to this, and I think it's a very exciting opportunity. In the meantime, we're going to continue to partner with SF State on the repair projects.
I just wanted to add that you did host a few mending workshops in the community.
Oh, yes, thank you.
And the mending workshops really seem to people just mending of doing a running stitch or putting on a button and giving them something so that people could take this home. And it's that kind of repair that also is very helpful to people so that they can personalize their garments, but they can also understand how to do it themselves, which I think is very needed.
Yeah, that was the goal. Thanks for mentioning that.
Please go to the next step slide. So next question that we have is, home goods and garment manufacturing has licensing requirement, but where does pet bedding and outdoor furnishing textile art fall? So I will give the disclaimer, I am not an expert. This law is under the California State Labor Bureau. The State Licensing Board is the one who hosts that. We did work with them, and from what I understand is that there's anything that's being sewn and then sold, it needs the licensing. So I can't speak specifically if pet bedding, outdoor furnishing, or art is out of the scope. For us, we didn't want to take any risk. There's also a gray area whether upcycling is considered new manufacturing and whether they even needed the license. But for us, because we have government dollars, we didn't zero risk. So we'd rather prefer someone to have that license, knowing that others exploring this might consider, unlicensed workers if their job or their task falls outside of the scope. So again, the California Labor Bureau is the one who hosts that license, that agency. On the cost of sale chart, why were only 702 garments included in the average? It looks like many more were repaired or redesigned. So the reason for that is because at the time, not all the garments were sold, and the other reason is not all the garments are being listed. So some of the things that we learned about the redesign is Goodwill's clientele prefer the good deals and don't always want the high fashion or maybe the higher price point. So Goodwill is working on displays in their stores and using those redesigns for telling the story and to building partnerships. So that's why the actual number of garments sold does not include a lot of the redesigns. It also doesn't include any of the items after October, because the labor for tracking the sales was really intensive, and we didn't think it was the best use of grant funds. So, once we listed, we kind of closed our tracking and went into the analyses. But really good question. I believe we repaired closer to 900 items.
Mm-hmm.
Next question, do you consider or find the difference between slow fashion brands or fast fashion brands? Did we consider? Yes, I do want to say yes, because ultimately at that $45 value, there are certain brands that automatically kind of get pulled into that category, and some brands that never get valued at higher than that. So this is one of those things that the Goodwill staff knew best. The Goodwill staff who handle these products all day, every day, know the brands that are recognizable and sell. So some consideration was taken in the sense that we really didn't repair fast fashion. It's not worth it when the new item is artificially low cost and the cost of repairing was equitable. It was kind of a mismatch. So we really focus our repairs on the slow fashion or luxury or just higher quality in general. Designing for the future is training textile repair. Absolutely, absolutely. And I see another question about EPR funds using for training. Absolutely, and that's why we want to pass the bill, because the funding in SB 707, and there's a earmark for repair. We know that repair funds will get more textile diversion than recycling ever will. So not only is there training or funding for repairs, for training, there's also a lot of education funding in SB 707 to support secondhand purchasing and repairs. All right, next question. And I know we only have a few minutes, so I am trying to go a little fast. Mending workshops were fantastic. Thank you. Anyone else who attended them, please share your experience. Fix It Clinic has mending workshops. Some of the brands are doing mending workshops, like Everlane might continue. So a lot of opportunities to get involved in community. Fiber Shed also in the North Bay, but does a lot of mending workshops. So good question from Gail. What was the most common repair? I'm going to hand this one to Connie.
I don't think there is a most common repair. I really don't, because I mean, we can ask Rebecca, but it wasn't, it was the idea that you think you're going to repair because there's a tear on the inside in the lining. And when you fix the lining, you realize, oh, it's also on the outer fabric. So it wasn't a simple repair, that it ended up being more than that. There was not one common one.
Also not one type of stain either. We learn a
Right.
lot about different types of stains on different fiber types.
Right.
And having the skill to match the stain with the fiber type is definitely a skill from savvy
And then
cleaners.
I know what happened is that we thought that the stain would come off with the cleaning, but it didn't. So after spending the money, it goes back to Goodwill. It still has the stain on it. What are they going to do? They can then sell it by saying that there is the stain here if they choose to do that online, if it's worth it for them. But it was a learning process.
Yeah, and so I see a really great question from Shauna about marketing. And I think that was one of the things we learned, that when we went into this project, we scoped it, we didn't have marketing. We didn't have a budget for outreach because we thought, oh, let's just repair the items, let's focus on repairs and move on. And they weren't selling, for high enough sale price.
Right.
So we actually did a budget modification a few months in to really carve out money for those hang tags, to develop the website. We did a lot of boosted social media posts. And so we found that you kind of need the marketing to tell that story. So for them to understand the transformations that garment went through. And so there's a question about, oh yeah.
Can I just add to that? And, you know, it was especially tricky to market to our online customers, to be honest. So that's why we're shifting now to doing, you know, showcasing these pieces in our store windows and in our physical stores. I think it will be easy. Our hope is that it'll be easier to tell the story.
And one of the things, like I said, Goodwill's clients want the deal. They almost want the damage to fix it themselves. So actually, one of the things that we started doing after the repair budget ran out was they continued pulling the damaged items that were high value, listing them with calling out the damage, and they still continued to sell.
Right.
So what we found was actually just selling them with the damage. And so one of the things we're really asking brands to get involved in, and this wonderful question about scaling this model, is Goodwill and thrifts have an opportunity to sell damaged items in bulk. So if there's a retailer whose clientele are aware of sustainability, or maybe we'll call them an eco retailer, they could buy damaged items in bulk, do the repairs themselves, and have that clientele who are willing to buy the repaired items at a higher price point. The other thing is scalability is through contracts and branding. We see companies like Renewal Workshop really taking lead on scaling repair with brands. And so SB 707 is really geared to support brands to get involved in repair of damaged items through whatever means, whether it's contracting or, doing the repairs themselves. We are at time, but I want to take a moment to actually ask, I have a hand. And so I wanted to see if Cece Clark wants to take themselves off mute, and I'm happy to answer any questions verbally.
So the licensing regarding resale, when it's repaired, somebody's bringing it to you, you're repairing it, and it's not being resold. They're paying for your services to fix it, correct? That's how it differentiates between resale and repair, right?
Correct. If you're not reselling the item, they don't need the license. It's just a business doing repairs. But if someone's selling the sewn items, yes.
Okay, so along with my question regarding the art installations, if we go around to businesses and solicit businesses to install textile art on the wall, that's a gray area, right?
I don't think so, because I think the art is not a garment.
Yeah.
Okay, so if somebody's doing textile art, because I had one of those moments you were talking about, having that aha moment and changing your scope, because making art stays on the wall a lot longer, and so I'm just trying to get some clarification on that, because once again, I work for the East Bay Depot. I've got a lot of textiles that I go through every day.
Yeah, you know what I would suggest, and they're really responsive. If you just email the California Labor Bureau and say, this is what I'm making, do we need a license? And then you have it in writing.
Yeah.
I do think this is a gray area, again, especially if it's repair and reuse. So they're really responsive, and the Bureau was wonderful to work with. So I would recommend maybe just getting it in writing. But my guess would be is not required, because it's not a garment. It's not being cut and sewn for being worn, and it's not necessarily being sold as
It could be cut and sewn, but it's not intentionally to be worn.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Clarification.
Yeah, yeah.
Wonderful. Are there any
gonna
other questions or comments? Sorry, Connie. Yeah, anything?
I was just going to say a lot of the questions on economy of scale. It's like, it is very possible that if we said, if Goodwill was willing and we work with them on saying, okay, all the shirts that come in, let's just take one category and let's get some economy of scale with one category of goods. And if, as Joanne was suggesting, another retailer was selling those, great, that could happen that way. What we've documented is that there are ways, after doing the research, to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And there are numerous possibilities. Thank you.
Absolutely. I want to take a moment to thank everyone for attending and thanking our webinar panelists. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Connie. And an especially big thank you to the San Francisco Environment Department for funding this project. Our contact information is on the screen. Please feel free to reach out with us for any questions, comments, or opportunities for future partnerships. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.